Hi, I'm Beth.
And I'm Courtney.
Welcome to Dead Reckoning, the podcast where death isn't the end of the story.
And this week, we're talking about the Almshouse in San Francisco. The Almshouse was a poorhouse that existed starting in the late 18th century and transformed over the years to become what we now know as Laguna Honda Hospital. And so it's still there in a form. And today we're going to talk about how the almshouse was started, why it was started, what it was like there. And we're going to have to kind of cover some of the social history of welfare and poverty and aid in the United States to get there. Beth, I know you know about the almshouse. We have mentioned the almshouse on previous episodes.
Do you think that the effort to call it a house, like with the pest house, is to make it sound a little cozier or something?
Well, they were actually called poorhouses at first.
Ugh.
So I think they tried to soften up poorhouse by calling it almshouse.
Mm,
It was kind of a house. It was better than a workhouse. Spoiler
Yeah.
alert. If you listen to the Anatomy Act episode we did, it's better than a workhouse.
That might be our tagline for the episode, better than workhouse.
I think anything was better than the fucking workhouse, dude. In order to talk about this, you guys, I'm sorry to tell you, and I'm going to keep this brief. We have to go back to Britain because all roads lead back to the empire. As most of you know, most of our laws and early policies and the way that we set up our early society derives from Great Britain, right? So we have to look briefly at the history of poverty and aid in Britain to understand how we got there in the 1850s. In England, in 1601, that's how far this stuff goes back, Queen Elizabeth passed Elizabethan poor laws. And these were the first formal structuring that was done for poor relief in England. And then that influenced how we did it when colonists came over from England. The Elizabethan poor laws were the first to also divide citizens based on the type of poor that they were. This is like a common theme here. We like to categorize the poor into different categories, so we know exactly how mean we need to be to them.
Great.
Yeah, they had three categories: able-bodied poor, the impotent poor, which was their way of talking about blind, elderly, disabled people, and children. Aid was organized through churches. So, most things were done through churches back then. Most local government was run by churches. And so the churches were put in charge of aid and they were funded by local taxes. So when they start formalizing this system of poor relief, they also begin to technically criminalize poverty. This is when vagrancy laws come up and become more likely to be enforced. Vagrancy laws are laws that basically ban you from being poor in public. Like,
Yeah.
you can't beg, you can't ask for help, you can't be seen to be quote unquote loitering. The Elizabethan poor laws started this.
I'm so glad we don't have those laws anymore.
No, we don't have those anymore. It's gone. It's done. Everybody is housed and fed. Thank God. Those laws set up this system of, okay, you can go here to the church and get relief. The church will tax the local people, pay for the relief, and then you got to stay off the street, right?
I have a question
Yeah.
already. Do you think the churches were doing this like out of true Christian kindness, or was it more a matter of, oh, if we save the poor people, then we'll go to heaven? That kind of thing.
No, I think the church was just an extension of the government. I think it was purely organizational. I think like most villages and things were run around parishes at that time. So I think it was just a way to organize it.
Got it.
That's my guess. So this system came over with the settlers in colonial New England. That would be our favorites, the Puritans. They kept a similar system. They taxed the local municipalities, but the Puritans, because they were Puritans, went even harder on separating the poor. And under Puritan classification systems and early colonial classifications, there were the worthy poor and the unworthy poor, right? So,
wow.
Yeah. So you either were a lazy piece of shit who didn't work in their eyes, and you were an unworthy poor person, or you were disabled or widowed or blind and you couldn't perform that type of work. The first system they created was this is the most American thing. They created a contract system where they would basically lease poor people out to farms and businesses. Their labor would be exchanged for room and board. They indentured people as servants or
Was
slaves.
this concurrent with enslavement or separate, like before
Yeah, for
enslavement?
sure. This is, I mean, yes, concurrent with enslavement. This is also like super early. Listen, this kept going into the 1800s, okay? This wasn't great. You guys, I don't have to tell you this, right? The contract system was abusive and people were not treated well. And you shouldn't have to be someone's indentured servant to get food and shelter and forfeit your agency and your rights and all those things in order to not starve and die in a New England winter.
Could people work their way out of this situation, or was it like for life?
That's a good question. We're going to get into how poverty works in the US, but a lot of it is cyclical because of the way the labor market has always been here. If you were a wage laborer, there would be times when you just were not making money, right? If you owned your farm and you were producing on your farm, you were less likely to be in need of this kind of aid. But if you were a laborer, there would be times where there's no work, right? Like there's no work in the winter for a farmer. So these people probably went in and out, which they will do also with the almshouses. This also leads to them establishing transiency laws, which are kind of like vagrancy laws. Because poor relief was based on the locality, they didn't want people traveling from locality to locality. Basically, they were fighting over who had to pay for poor relief. So this is kind of like how we get vagrancy and transiency laws here. People fighting over who has to pay for these poor people. This does happen here too, as well, right? Now, modern day, year of our Lord 2025, we do have cases of, like hospitals dumping patients and cops driving homeless people over county lines and things like that. It's a version of that.
One-way bus tickets to other places.
Yes. So in England in the 1830s, as we talked about in our Anatomy Act episode, they began to change the way they handled poor relief. I'm going to use these words, by the way, interchangeably. Sometimes it's called relief, sometimes it's called aid, sometimes it's called welfare. You'll hear me say the welfare state, and do not jump up my dick about it, because that is a term of art. That means like how aid is distributed through the government. When I say welfare state, I'm not a Fox News commentator. That's just the term, the way they talk about it.
Thank you.
I am pro 1000%. All the aid that everyone needs, okay? But don't get triggered. That's what that is. So in 1830s, again, we talked about it in Anatomy Act. You guys can go back and listen to that. They moved relief, poor relief, from what they called outdoor aid to indoor aid. Outdoor aid means giving people food, money. Today, it's like housing vouchers, whatever it is. It's just assistance to help you stay in your home, be clothed, fed, and taken care of. Indoor aid is the workhouse. And the workhouses in England were institutions where poor people were sent basically to be punished for being poor. They were like prisons for poor people. The idea was to deter people from seeking aid. So they did not want you to be poor, and they thought that if they were mean enough about it, you would miraculously not be poor anymore. So the workhouses were filthy, dangerous, crowded. They made them do meaningless, tedious labor to earn their keep. They were hostile systems. I had to enunciate that because when I was thinking about it earlier, it sounded like I was saying hostile. Like you could go stay in a hostel and
Right.
meet some kids from Germany and share a joint. That's not what was going on. This was fucking bad stuff, hostile.
As I recall too, the workhouses had incredibly poor food,
Yes, gruel.
and people often starved to death between forced labor and not getting enough nutrition.
Yeah, for sure. And you guys, then they sold their bodies to the anatomists, as we know from our Anatomy Act episode. All of this leads to the formation of the poorhouse in the US. Okay, so 1830s, Britain, their trend is moving to indoor relief. Here in the US, everything happens a little later here. So around 1850s in the US, they start to transition the way they help poor people to being what they call indoor relief or sending you to the poorhouse. That's the original nomenclature. It was called the poorhouse. Like we said earlier, almshouse was like a nicer way of saying that. We're in the US, 1850s. This is the beginning of the rise of institutions and things like that, among them the poorhouse. I want to talk about the source I used for this research before I get into it. It's a book called In the Shadow of the Poorhouse, A Social History of Welfare in America by Michael B. Katz. And it was published in the 90s and updated in the 2000s, but I feel like it's still good. It kind of gives like a really good overall history of how we handle poverty in the United States and how our systems are formed. And spoiler alert, it's not great. But the big takeaway from the book is that it's incomplete, right? That's one of the biggest problems with our system. So there's like four main issues with aid in the United States, in particular this country. First of all, the systems of public assistance and then social insurance are separate. So like public assistance is if you need housing vouchers or food stamps or that kind of aid, it's means tested. You have to be poor to get that aid. And then social insurance is Social Security and Social Security disability insurance, right? Which is not means tested. It's everyone gets it.
Well, and everyone pays into their own Social Security
Yes.
and disability. So, yeah.
Yes. So what it ends up being is class segregated social welfare. It's kind of a good way to think about it because we don't tend to think about social welfare as being Social Security, but that is like a huge component of it. And it is, in some senses, segmented by class. Because of federalism, our systems are divided between local and federal. So you have the federal government doing some things, states doing some things, counties doing some things. Here in the US, also, it's a mix of public and private aid and public and private partnerships. Like some of our relief is given through the state or through the federal government, and some of it comes from nonprofits and charities and things like that, some of which are also funded by the government. And then finally, the big issue is that the system is incomplete. We have a partial welfare state here in the United States. We don't have healthcare. We don't have free daycare. We don't have free education. We don't have, well, higher education. We don't have the full spectrum of social welfare covered here in the US.
Does he talk about why that is?
Well, hold on. I'm going to pivot on that because our different purposes for providing relief and aid. And this does kind of answer your question, Beth. So, like, the number one thing, obviously, is relief from poverty. People need to eat, they need shelter, whatever. Another purpose for the government to fund aid is the preservation of social order and discipline. If you have hungry people who don't have housing or food, it leads to riots and violence and stealing. And there is a preservation of the order component to this, which goes beyond just like we're trying to keep people fed because everyone has a right to food, right? That's not it. Another purpose for government aid is for the regulation of the labor market. Because of the way our labor market is here in the United States, we need to cover the gaps and we need workers, right? So you need people to be in the factories working. If they don't have enough to eat, they can't go work. We'll get into it a little bit more, but there's like a lot of intersection of what happens with the labor market and why people need aid, which I'm sure you guys can probably guess what it is. We don't pay people enough, and we never have.
Well, and that's by design, I think. I mean, I think that goes back to why is it incomplete? Well, because this is how the powers that be kind of want it to be.
Yeah, it greases the wheels of the economy and the shareholders of Walmart, right? So the final purpose of aid is political mobilization. Can go both ways. Like we use aid as a political football in this country. We are seeing that happen right now. I don't know when you guys are going to be listening to this, but it's November 2025 right now. And Donald Trump is withholding food aid from 40 million people in hopes that it will end the government shutdown, that he can bring Democrats to the table by denying people food aid that our tax dollars have already paid for and that's already been set aside, assigned, whatever it is by Congress. So that is like in the US, it's also like a big part of politics here. US poorhouses, 1850s, we're moving from outdoor to indoor relief. This is coinciding with the Industrial Revolution. People are moving from the country into the cities. Around this time, other institutions are also forming. We're coming into like an age of institutionalization. There are orphanages, asylums, prisons. These things are all being built up around this time.
It's interesting to me that this is happening just at the same time that San Francisco is getting going as a city. And you
Yeah.
can see this like over and over within the first 10 to 20 years after the city's incorporation. People are just like, well, we need one of these, and we need one of these,
Yep.
and we need one of these.
Yeah, for sure. I have a list here from 1903, just further in the future, right? Like our almshouse was set up in the 1860s, late 1860s. But by 1903, San Francisco had 13 orphanages, 10 homes for the aged and infirm, one asylum, and one almshouse. We also had the pest house still at this time, although I believe it was winding down. So, yeah, poorhouses are a thing roughly from the 1850s to the 1930s. Most of them became old folks' homes and skilled nursing facilities in the 1930s with the rise of Social Security and Social Security insurance. Demographically, most of them were filled with the poor working class. These are people who fell on hard times, right? And they're cycling in and out of poverty. There are a lot of reasons for this. God, this sounds like a fucking economics podcast. I'm sorry, you guys. We're just doing it. We're going forward with the outline. I'm sorry. The labor market was very unpredictable at this time because people are moving away from traditional agrarian jobs, local trades and craftsman jobs into cities, mechanized labor. I'm sorry to tell you this, they are being alienated from their labor and they are now wage workers, okay? And when you're a wage worker, you have less control over when you have work. Somebody has to hire you. And so, in times where there's no hiring, there is no work for many people. It's a very common situation, especially in the winter on the East Coast and in the Midwest. I didn't realize this, but a lot of work stopped. Like outdoor work mostly does not continue in those cold temperatures. And you're also going to like freeze to death if you're outside, right?
Right. Well, and I think again in San Francisco, like people who had almost run out of money in other parts of the country came to San Francisco because they're like, I'm going to find gold and that will be the solution to my poverty problem. And there are so many people who came here and just completely ran out of money.
You mean they didn't find gold? That's so weird. I mean, I know they're coming here for AI and they're definitely finding it, right? Everything, right? I'm told there's an AI revolution going
There's
on right now.
AI and then there are hills.
It's okay, also, this thing that I didn't know, because this isn't an economics podcast, even though it is fronting as one today, is that we had a lot of economic depressions, like a lot. Like every 20 or 30 years, there was a fucking depression in the 1800s, which I didn't know. I mean, when I look back on it, there were several in the 20th century alone, right? Shouldn't surprise anyone. During times of economic depression, these unemployment numbers would go up even higher. And so people cannot maintain steady work in a way that allows them to live. That's it. It's not because people are lazy. And Katz calls this out specifically in his book. So he's a fucking guy. He's like a professor or something. It's not me saying this, you guys. It's the expert. That the idea that there's a job for everyone who wants one, that is a myth. And it goes all the way back to 1601. It is not true. And it has never been true here in this country that there is a job for everyone who wants one, especially during times of like economic crisis. Like 1873, there was a depression, and then there was another one in 1893. And then you know how this goes into the 1900s. You get, the Great Depression in the 30s. It is not true that everyone who wants a job can have a job. That's a lie. It's a myth. And it's told in order to justify not supporting poor people. It's a way to excuse your own responsibility as a society to help people. And you're right, Beth, that all that does is prop up the shareholders of Exxon, and that's a dated reference, Walmart, OpenAI. You notice I'm not saying Google. I'm not going to bite the hand that feeds. Poorhouses, that's how people are getting relief. In 1893, when there's like up to 20% unemployment, those people are going into the poorhouses. It is at this time that like they start coming up with new classifications for poor people again. This is my favorite part of every episode where I talk about what slurs were exciting and new in the Victorian era America. They begin to look at the poor, the working poor, as lazy versus industrious. It's kind of like a new flavor on worthy versus unworthy, impotent versus able-bodied. So they begin to say that there is a class of worker, which is the laborer. For men, it's a laborer. For women, it's domestic servants. Those are the working class poor. If they are not employed, they're a problem and they are lazy. And they come up with a new insult for men, specifically men, because men were the real target of the ire, right? Women and children were seen as like helpless, dependents, whatever. I mean, we'll get into like what they really thought about women later, but men, any man who was in a poorhouse, that was a problem. They didn't want him in there.
Right, because it was like it got tied up with masculinity. What do you mean you're not able to provide for your people or take care of yourself?
Yeah. So this new word came up. The word is tramp. So I'm sorry to tell you, Lady and the Tramp, that adorable dog, that was like a nasty word for a poor laborer who was not working. I was kidding when I was saying slur. It's not really. It's kind of like calling someone a bum. The way they used this word at this time reminds me of how they talk about homeless people now. Well, they'll be like, oh, there's like a homeless guy over there. And what the coded meaning is that it's like a threatening male presence. That was how the word was used.
That's
right?
interesting. Like today, I think of the word tramp as being associated with people who intentionally like train hop or travel around sort of nomadically.
Oh, like a hobo.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a different slur, Beth. I'm kidding.
Well, but also people who do that have reclaimed the word hobo. I think, and I could be wrong, that the word tramp has become connected to that lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, it also means a whore.
Oh, yeah.
That lady, she's a tramp. That's a different Lady and the Tramp. Yeah.
I would watch that movie.
That's like one of their least problematic movies, although maybe not so much anymore.
The sex worker and her adorable dog.
Her adorable vagrant laborer husband, who is currently unemployed and must seek indoor relief at the poorhouse. Also, by the way, it has always been cheaper to just give people money and groceries and shit and let them live in their own house than to institutionalize them in these huge houses and workhouses. It's always been cheaper and more efficient, but they never did that because that wasn't mean enough.
Right. They have to create this myth that you have to work hard in order to earn your food and your shelter. And if you don't have food and shelter, you must not have worked hard enough. So if the government is giving food and shelter out for free, that means the whole thing is a lie.
Yes. There's like a lot of morality tied up in that. The poorhouses, I will say, on the whole, better than the workhouses in England. They had a different kind of goal. It was less punitive than the workhouse. Like the workhouse was like straight up, they hated you and they wanted to ruin your life. The poorhouse was more like the work was being done to keep the house moving along. If you went into a poorhouse, you were expected to work, but you would be like, someone would be cooking and someone would be washing dishes and someone would be sewing clothes. Like it was that kind of work. It was the work to keep the thing running. And it was productive work, at least.
A little bit like being on the farm and somebody's milking the cows and somebody's collecting the eggs and
Exactly.
somebody's tilling the field.
That's exactly right, Beth. You were living on a farm and you were contributing to the farm and you were eating the food that was grown there. It was a healthier situation than the workhouses in England. And then, of course, all this stuff depends on location. Are you in the city? Are you in the country? Some places funded these things better. Generally, it seems like the poor farms were like the place to be if you had to be in an institution. Which brings us to the San Francisco Almshouse, which was kind of a cross between a poorhouse and a poor farm because it did have a farm on it. The Almshouse, it is on the site, you guys, of Laguna Honda Hospital right now. So if you go Google Map that, if you're not from here, that was the site of the Almshouse. It's been kind of continuously operating there. It opened in 1866. It started as a 4-story wooden building built on the land of San Miguel Rancho, which was owned by the last alcalde, Noe. The alcaldes were the Spanish mayors. It is called Laguna Honda because there's a lagoon over there, which I believe is now the reservoir. If we have time, at the end, if you guys sit through Economics 210, at the end, I have a ghost story about that reservoir for you. But you have to pay attention to some more numbers coming. Okay, so it was opened first as a place for chronically ill and impoverished people. Yeah. The first building was meant to house 400 to 500 people, which is kind of a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. 1866, it was started. 1868, they built an annex for smallpox. And if you listen to our episode on the pest house, you know that the sick people who were sent to the almshouse were mostly white people. The Chinese immigrants were sent to the pest house, which was much worse conditions. This annex was nicer.
Of course it was.
Yeah. By the 1800s, it had grown to house 900 people. In 1906, the time of the earthquake, it was so remote that it was not burned down by the fire. So it became a relief site for people. People camped there. They fled there after the earthquake to live and to get help. It took in a bunch of refugees, and I have a note here that it could fit up to 1,000 people. But I bet you people were camping and stuff too, because they were camping in the park. So in 1910, they added Clarendon Hall. And then in 2008, that was demolished to make room for Laguna Honda Hospital. In the 1920s and 30s, as I mentioned, it became a skilled nursing facility. In 1938, I thought this was interesting. They used WPA, Works Progress Administration funds, to update the building. And there are some preserved murals in there that I would love to go see.
Oh, that's cool.
That are still there. Yeah. The vibe at the Almshouse was better than the pest house. I will tell you that. It was described by contemporary journalists, reporters as pretty bucolic. Like it was remote in terms of where it is in the city. And it was kind of like a nice little farm. There was like animals roaming around and people were planting crops and the inmates had clothes, like good clothes. The conditions were good. They had a lot of food. Everybody got as much food as they needed. It was like wholesome food that they were growing on the property. They had medical care. They had kind of what they needed. It does not sound like it was that bad. I'm sure I wouldn't want to go fucking live at the almshouse today. But compared to some of the other stuff we have talked about on this podcast, like the pest house, the workhouse, the city and county hospital of San Francisco, which had to be burned down because it was infested by plague and rat fleas, the almshouse was the place to be.
I mean,
right?
I will add, for people who don't live in the area and aren't familiar with this part of San Francisco, like, it's really beautiful. It's hilly, there are trees, and some of the most expensive homes in the city are in this
Yeah.
part of the city, right around the Forest Hill train station,
Yes.
and up on the hills. Like, this is a really beautiful area to be in.
Yes. You almost wouldn't even know you're in San Francisco. And it was that way at the time, too. And like I said, the people were doing useful labor. They were harvesting crops and sewing clothes, and like they had labor based on their ability and their talents. And it wasn't like they weren't picking oakum, right? Like at the workhouse. They were doing useful shit, and they were running a pretty much self-sustaining operation, right? It's still getting city funding, but part of the reason they were able to have kind of like a nice quality of life was because they were farming and being productive. Beth, my friend and co-host, found me a very cool study. This study is from 1895, and I'm going to tell you guys about some of the details of it because they do, like, some of it does line up with the national experience of how these places operated and evolved, and then some of it is a little bit different. I mean, I think because it was a nice location, and you have year-round farming here, and things were a little nicer.
One of the things that I really like about this study is that it was written by a woman sociologist, which was unusual in 1895. And she was like, nobody looks at the women's experiences in places like this. So I'm going to do that. And I'm like, this is great, actually.
Yeah, and actually around this time, I should mention that the late 1800s, you get wealthy women starting to get involved in charitable work in the United States. And in big cities, especially on the East Coast, they were focused on the poorhouses. It's complicated, but they did do a lot of good work, right? They actually were able to put a lot of pressure on the authorities to improve conditions. They had political clout because of their status in society. They volunteered at these places, they donated, they became very involved in the poorhouses. And then out of that came this other segment of educated female social workers and sociologists and stuff. This is kind of like the first wave of them. I'm thinking about Jane Addams, who's like the mother of social work in the United States. This woman, Mary Roberts Smith, who wrote this report, is kind of like that. She's like a sociologist. Jane Addams was more of an activist, but this is like a very early start of the progressive era when women are getting involved and focusing on women too, which Jane Addams also did. So it's cool. Now, Mary Roberts Smith is a product of her time. So so she wrote this in 1895. Props to her, the first full-time sociologist at Stanford, and she founded the sociology department at Mills. So this bitch knew what she was doing. She did have a lot of opinions, and we are going to hear about them. Her opinions are, of course, the opinions of most of the people who were doing this kind of work in the turn of the century. 1895, she's at the Almshouse studying the women in San Francisco. She, right off the bat, when I first started reading this, I was like, oh my God, Beth, this lady is like spilling the tea. She comes right out in the report at the beginning, calls the employees incompetent, says the city is corrupt, says the county hospital is like dumping all their patients at the almshouse. She calls it a dumping ground in a rag bag for the undesirables of San Francisco, which, like, she's probably not wrong. I mean, she should go over to the pest house. That's the real dumping ground. But you had to have a disease to get in there. That's the start of her study. She does some demographic analysis of who's there, and ethnically, most of the women there are Irish, 33 to 43% of them. She has a lot to say about the Irish, and it's not good.
No, it is not good. She's like, I don't understand why everyone's being so mean to the Chinese people when the Irish people are right here.
It's a missed opportunity. Yeah. Okay, so also at this time, great waves of migration coming to the United States, starting with the Irish in the 1850s from the famine, and then Eastern Europeans, Southern Europeans. A lot of people are saying that Europe is dumping its trash in America. We don't talk like that anymore. Thank God.
Well, and we should point out that you and I are both descended from Irish immigrants.
I am the awful OFFAL of Europe. That's right. I think I said in the last episode I'm a Polish anchor baby, but I could just as easily be an Irish one too. So let's be fucking for real here. Most of us, our people came around this time, right? Most fucking white people in the United States. The Poles, the Italians, the Irish. Europe was dumping its trash on our shores, and we were being forced to take care of them. That's the attitude. So she says that. She also blames the Celtic temperament for them being poor. She says they are prone to drinking, they're uneducated, yada, 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 right? Like same old, same old. That's the biggest group that's there. There are other people from other mixed European backgrounds there, but really she kind of calls out the Irish. She does mention, and this is interesting, that there are no Chinese people there. And she attributes this to the Chinese community taking care of their own. But we know from previous episodes that this is racist and segregationist policies.
It makes me wonder. I mean, she couldn't have not known about the pest house, right? She had to have known. But at the same time, she's like, I don't know where all the Chinese people are.
Yeah, you would think, but here we are. There are a lot of widows there, obviously, right? Like this is always kind of a core part of the population, especially once they kick the men out and the children. Basically, who's left there are women who age in place. She does this class analysis. She asks people what class they belong to. I think these are self-reported. I don't think she's assigning classes to people, but the majority are classed as peasants. Does that feel like a word we were using in 1895 in the US? Maybe if you came from
Yeah, I
Ireland?
wonder if it was in more common usage in Ireland, but I don't
Yeah.
know for sure.
So most of the people are classified as peasants. The next category above peasant is respectable working class, which I take to mean like tradesmen, people like that who have a trade versus being a laborer. I'm interpreting this as peasants being laborers because when they look at the jobs, these women, most of them are domestic servants, which is the labor that uneducated, poor women performed in the United States, right? Like if you came off the boat from Ireland, you were like a scullery maid or you were carrying coal from house to house or something. You weren't necessarily like operating a shop, but most have no education, as I mentioned, no formal training for work. They can't read and write. They are the poor working class of America, which bears out with the national data, right? Most of them were mothers. This is sad. This is like, this part really bummed me out. Most of them had children who had been moved to orphanages or were grown and unable to take care of their parents. 1/4 to 1/2 of their children had died. Smith, she's kind of a bitch about it. She like talks about how they don't know how many kids they have. And it's this attitude that we're so familiar with today, right? Where like, oh, she has so many kids, she doesn't even know how many died and where they are and blah, blah, blah. As far as I could tell, this woman at this time, this is an unmarried woman who does not have children. I know because she changes her name later. So this bitch has no kids. She doesn't have a husband. She doesn't know what any of this is like. She comes from the upper class. She implies that a lot of them are whores, they're sluts because they're children out of wedlock. Like, of course, they're not going to tell you the full extent of all the children they've lost, right? All the babies that died in infancy or died of malnutrition or were taken away by the state, or like, there's a million explanations for why people would be saying to her, well, I'm not exactly sure how many
Yeah, they
children I
might,
have.
and it might just hurt to enumerate that given all the losses that they probably
Yes.
experienced.
Yes. And a lot of them have had their children taken away, right? The children are in orphanages. It's not surprising that those children then grow up and don't come take care of they may not even know who their parents are,
Well,
right?
and I wonder too, again, we have not done an episode about the Magdalene Asylum yet, but women who entered the Magdalene Asylum for mental health treatment, being addicted to alcohol, those kinds of things, often their children were sent to orphanages. And some of the women in the Magdalene Asylum were later sent on to the Almshouse for a variety of reasons. So there's this whole system of
Yep.
like separating mothers and children. Yeah.
Institutionalization. Yeah. So, and then, you've got probably a portion of them peeling off into prison, right? Like, especially the kids that grew up in poverty. And this fits the national trend too, right? They're moving the kids out to orphanages. They're pushing the quote unquote able bodied men out. It's mostly older women who have had kids. Smith spent some time trying to tease out the causes of pauperism. And this is going to be just as entertaining as you would expect it to be. Pauperism, meaning poverty, meaning the reason you're in the almshouse, just to be clear. The first cause she lists is the gold rush, which is like kind of accurate.
I think I said that already.
Yeah, right. It's like accurate, but also there's like a kind of a hint that the licentiousness of the gold rush was part of the
All
problem.
of that drinking and brawling and visiting houses of ill repute.
Yes, all that whoring around. The second one was drug problems, even though she says there's no evidence of that and she hasn't seen it. She does know that it's easy to hide it.
I mean, there was a
So
whole
she's-
like moral panic around the use of opium in San Francisco, again connected to ideas about Chinese and racism and all of this stuff. So
Yeah.
that might be connected to her theorizing about drugs.
Yeah, it's literally just fucking theorizing. She's like, well, they're on drugs. And it's like, there's no evidence. But like, so she does qualify her statement and tell us, but she knows in her 1895 virgin mind that they're doing drugs. Number 3, alcoholism, especially the Irish. Probably. Immorality, which is having children out of wedlock, which is more fodder for the welfare queen bullshit that we still hear today. She also mentions shiftlessness and inefficiency as a cause of poverty.
So like ADHD.
I'd be there for sure, dude, in the almshouse. Like, what do you want me to pick next? She's partly being a bitch, okay? But also, I think she's talking about how the workers are kind of transient. I think shiftlessness actually means like they're having to move around a lot to find labor and that's inefficient, which she's right. But it just has this kind of like tramps
Exactly.
overlay to it. Tramps. Neglect by relatives. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call it neglect so much as like the family's unable to support them. Sickness, for sure. We know sickness was a problem. And we talked about tuberculosis patients being sent to the almshouse. She talks about some other things. Sickness, she's including like probably people who have hearing and vision problems, chronic illness, things like that prevent them from being able to work.
Actually, I imagine too that a certain number of people might have either developed arthritis or back conditions or things like that from the hard labor that they were
Yes.
trying to do before they lost work or they couldn't work because they were injured. And again, this could play into why are people turning to alcohol, or if there was drugs, maybe these are self-medication.
Yeah.
This is my current rant about homeless people in San Francisco, but probably a lot of these people were injured or hurt or suffering chronic pain.
Yeah, for sure. And Beth, we know that from the work on the cemeteries too. When they have done forensic archaeology on the bones of the people buried in the Potter's Field in San Francisco, the indigent cemetery, they can see this on the bones, right? Arthritis, injuries, broken bones, poorly healed things.
Yeah, exactly. Vertebral disc disease, bone breakages that didn't heal well,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
And that will disable you. This is the Medicare. This is the SSI. This is the workers' comp. It's all this. You have to be in the almshouse. Temperament is the next cause listed of being a pauper.
The Celtic temperament.
The Celtic temperament. Yeah. Temperament, I think, is like a catch-all term for like mental illness and like bad attitude. I think she sees it as like a combination of these things. And I think it's like things that are preventing people from getting along in society. I don't think she means it so much as you're annoying or people don't like you or something. You know what I mean? I think it has to do with like your ability mentally to cope with what's going on. Because she also mentions in the same breath that the asylums are overcrowded and the almshouse is absorbing a lot of the poor people who should be probably in a mental health asylum, which is probably true nationally also. There's probably like a lot of
Yeah, I think
crossover
unfortunately
there.
the official term for that institution was the lunatic asylum.
Yeah, that's why I
Thank
said
you.
mental health asylum, because old age, we talked about that, right? She does mention syphilis, and I have a note here that says, not for Chinese women, because obviously they were sent to the pest house. And then the last cause, she calls it feeble mindedness, which I think is the old fashioned way of saying is people with intellectual disabilities and things that prevent them from being able to work or take care of themselves. That's what they used to call the impotent poor. So that's her study, which thank you for sending that to me, Beth. It was really interesting to read it. It does line up a lot of what was going on here, was going on nationally, but also I came away from this one feeling like it was a little better compared to where you could have been housed. The almshouse did not seem like the worst place in the
Yeah,
world.
I think I actually found this study around the time that I was reading Nellie Bly's book about going undercover in a mental institution, which was just awful.
Oh.
So, yeah, this definitely seemed a little bit better by comparison. And depending on how you look at it, I mean, like,
Yeah.
as a chronically ill person, if I could live somewhere and get fresh food and sew all day, that sounds kind of great.
Yeah. You would be put in the lace making department. Yeah.
Although
I
I
can totally see you like in a rocking chair with a blanket over your lap, like a cat nearby, just like sewing
Yeah.
inmate
I mean,
wear
I
all
will say
day.
that if they didn't have good vision care, good eyeglasses, like, that stuff is really hard to do if you can't see properly, so
Yeah. Well, also, it does feel like they had community around them too. You know, you're not alone. Everyone has kind of something to do, a role to play. Not that I think people have to work, whatever, but like everyone has kind of like a place they slot in and work together.
well, and it makes life feel better when you have a purpose. When you have something that is
Yes.
your job. Yeah.
100%. Okay, so we're going to get to the speculative portion of the episode. We are now departing Econ 210 and we're moving back to my particular area of interest, which is it's going to take 2 seconds compared to this whole fucking episode. But are there people buried on the property? Question mark. Is there a graveyard at the almshouse? And the answer is maybe. So we know that cemeteries were frequently built on the property of almshouses, workhouses, poorhouses. Like we talked about this in the Anatomy Act episode. There could very well have been a burial ground here. Beth and I are big super fans of this doctoral thesis from one of our San Francisco city archaeologists named Carrie Hervey Lentz. Carrie wrote a doctoral thesis about forensic archaeology in San Francisco in our old graveyards. Beth, feel free to correct. Am I right?
It was a project of mapping the cemeteries to figure out where they were, in part because so this person also works in the city planning department, and they created an internal map to help, when people apply for permits to build or reconstruct something, they can know, like, there might be something here that you have to be extra careful with. So they mapped the cemeteries, but also talked quite a bit about the history of burial in San Francisco. It's a great read, actually.
Dream job, honestly. So in Carrie's dissertation, Guna Honda is listed as the site of an unmapped burial ground operating circa 1867, which would be right when it opened, right? That's what I have about that is that it's mentioned in their thesis and in their tables as a potential burial site or an unmapped site. I don't know anything else, but I will say there's an interesting clue in Mary Roberts Smith's
Mhm.
report about the almshouse. Part of her reason for why she thinks there are no Chinese inmates at the almshouse is because they don't want to bury their dead in a foreign land. We do know that most Chinese immigrants here, Chinese Americans, they would bury their dead 10 years or so until they were bones mostly, and then send the bones back to their hometown to be buried in family vaults. That was the tradition.
Yeah, and the Chinese community had organizations that helped do this work and helped pay for it.
Right. So that is a practice. I don't know how it relates to them being buried at the almshouse, but that did stand out to me as like a little clue.
I mean, that is really interesting. I mean, if she's saying that, maybe she's thinking that there was a fear that people who were buried on this site could not go through the rituals that the Chinese community preferred. I mean, I think there's a couple of other clues in that this site was very far away from any other burial sites. Like, it was a really uninhabited, undeveloped part of the city at this time in the 1860s, 1870s. Nobody.
Right. It would have been hard to get them over to City Cemetery or Yerba Buena, right?
Well, actually, at this time, neither of those cemeteries was operating. Yerba Buena was closed, and City Cemetery was not yet open. It would make sense to bury people in place, and also, we know from our research. So there was a poor farm in San Mateo County, and there was a poor farm in Marin County, and they both have
Yes.
burial grounds for people who died in these facilities.
You beat me to my outline. You're not supposed to know my clues. You're
Sorry,
only supposed to have
Courtney.
your own clues. So, like Beth said, San Mateo County Poor Farm and Marin County Poor Farm. San Mateo County, that opened in 1876. I am from San Mateo County, so these are, I don't know, I'm not like from there, but I did grow up there. For those who know, it is along 280 near Crystal Springs. Or it was. Well, it is, because there's still a burial ground there. It's like right where 92 crosses 280, Ralston, Polhemus over there, Crystal Springs. That's where the poor farm was. There are still graves there. 542 graves are recorded. Some of them have wooden markers. They have done forensic work that shows that there are probably over 600 people actually buried there. That's quite a lot. And then in Marin County, there is also a marked graveyard from the Marin Poor Farm, which was open from 1880 until 1963. And there are 600 people, about 600 people buried there as well. The thing that's cool about that, because I like when the youth get involved, in 2019, some local Marin teenagers were responsible for getting it memorialized. They made a little film about it, they fundraised, and they had it closed off and marked, which I thought was
That's really
fucking
sweet.
awesome.
They say teenagers don't care about anything, right?
Yeah, seriously. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But also, it seems that Marin County Farm Cemetery also may have doubled as a potter's field. So there may have been additional people being buried there. That's probably true of San Mateo as well, if I had to guess, is a place for people to be buried if they didn't have anywhere else. And so it was a custom. It was a practice to bury people on site, especially at these farm-like remote locations. So I agree, Beth, that does tend towards some evidence that there could be a graveyard still on that site at Laguna Honda.
I mean, like, this is me asking myself a question, but we know that there was an effort to remove all the cemeteries for the most part in San Francisco, and a place like the Magdalene Asylum, which also had a small cemetery. They were very careful to remove everybody, particularly once the land sold to the city for a city institution, which Laguna Honda also is. So it makes me wonder why
Yeah.
we don't know more about this potential for a burial ground at the almshouse and why those people might not have been moved. So
That's kind of where I left it. I looked. Okay, I'm not a reporter. I looked, and that's my guess. It's interesting to think about. And I don't know if you guys have ever walked over there. I remember walking. I was going to go do it before I recorded this episode, but I ran out of time. If you walk behind there, there's a trail behind there in Laguna Honda, and it's full of old hospital trash. Have you ever seen that?
Yikes. No, I keep meaning to go over there too, and I haven't yet. It feels so forbidding, kind of.
It's like old shit that they have thrown out of Laguna Honda. It's like in place in the vines and shit over there. It's very strange, and it's giving like a little bit of a horror movie vibe, which I do appreciate. It's weird. So it's creepy. There's only one thing left to cover in this podcast. We're full back in Here Lies territory. We're no longer in economics.
Yeah, I believe you promised us a ghost
population
story.
trends in the US. Yeah, I got a
Yay.
ghost story for you guys. Okay, so I heard this ghost story from my friend Joan. Shout out to Joan. Joan grew up here in the city, and she told me that there is a ghost in the reservoir. And if you go swimming in that reservoir, that ghost will pull on your legs and try to drown you. Huh? Look at that. You think that was an almshouse resident, perhaps?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, there are also so many mythologies about don't go swimming there because you don't know what's going to happen.
The ghost tugging on the legs is like a popular
yeah.
ghost story, but there is specifically about that
Wow.
reservoir out there. So, like, first of all, you
Mm-mm.
shouldn't be swimming in that. Full stop. So let's
There are
reinforce the
places
legend
to
of
swim
the
in San
ghost,
Francisco
because
that
what are you doing
are
in there?
much better
Yeah.
than perhaps that lagoon.
That's the story. That's it. That's all I have. That's the
Thank you.
almshouse. I kept it to a tight 115 here.
Thank
so.
you. Economics, sociology, a little anti-Irish sentiment, a little ghost story. Yeah.
I would say a lot, actually. But
yeah, she did have a lot to say about the Irish.
She sure did. Just before we wrap up, I gave you the ghost story, so now you guys have to go rate and review us wherever you get your podcast, because we need because of the AI in their hills, we need the likes to get our podcast into the street. Oh my God. Can you imagine? This is me working in marketing. We need the rates and the reviews so that the people can hear our podcast, because that's what the fucking algorithm wants, you guys. So if you would be so kind, if you enjoyed this economics lecture from an unqualified ghost blogger, please rate and review.
Thanks,
it helps
Courtney.
us. You're welcome. Thanks, Carolyn.
Dead Reckoning, the podcast where death isn't the end of the story. Hosted by Courtney Minnick and Beth Weingardner, produced by Carolyn Kissick and Here Lies a Story, with art design by Dante Silliman. Our music is Act Calm by OTE. Please rate, review, and subscribe to Dead Reckoning on your favorite podcast platform, or email us at show@deadreckoningpodcast.com. You can follow Courtney at Here Lies a Story on Instagram and at Courtney Minnick on Blue Sky, and see more of her work at HereLiesAStory.com. You can follow Beth at Beth Weingardner on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Mastodon, and see more of her work at BethWeingardner.com.